Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled Hospitality Business Intelligence Insights That Drive Profits. My name is Jason Freed, and I'm a hospitality data evangelist at Otelier. Unfortunately, due to a family emergency, John Burns of Hospitality Technology Consulting was not able to join us today, so I'm going to take over moderating duties. And a couple quick housekeeping notes before we get started. First, the audio is on mute for all the attendees, and due to time constraints, we won't be able to take live questions today. However, at the end of the session, we'll provide contact information for each of the speakers who will make themselves available for follow-up questions. Also, the session is being recorded, and tomorrow we'll send an email to all the registrants with a link to the video and slides. With that said, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists today and have them say a few words about their role. Ed, can I start with you?
Yep. So I'm Ed Nickelson, Director of Information Technology for Pinehurst Resort and Country Club.
Awesome. Thanks for being with us. Niki?
Hi, I'm Niki Johnson, Chief Product Officer here at Otelier. We manage the product lines that Otelier supports and markets into the hospitality industry.
Thanks for being with us, Niki. Ravi?
Hey, my name is Ravi Acharya. I run the Business Analytics Business Intelligence program at Agilysys. We are Agilysys, the technology solution provider leaders in the hospitality industry, and I'm glad to be here today.
All right, thanks guys for that introduction. Now let's get into today's topic, hospitality business intelligence insights that drive profits. So why do we think this is an important topic for hoteliers to be focused on today? In general, the hotel industry in 2024 is experiencing flatlining demand and increasing pricing pressure. In many cases, hotels are facing rising operating costs that are outpacing revenue growth, and the result is declining profit margins. If you look at this chart in front of us, guys, this is from CoStar STR. You look at the percent change from 2023 to 2024 for each of these metrics. TrevPAR looks good. GoPAR looks not so great. EBITDA relatively flat. And then the important number there on the far right is that labor cost per available room up 7.5% year over year. The good thing is, if you look in the bottom right on this chart, that does seem to be slowing in May of 2024. So as we all know, the two main drivers of increased expenses are labor/wages, which are up, close to 50% since 2019, and amenity costs in addition to that. This next slide here shows some of the new profit KPIs that we're measuring today and by segment. And the thing to pay attention to here is, so you look at the purple circles, right? And you can see growth in EBITDA per available room percent change. And most of the chain scales, except for luxury, there on the bottom left, you see luxury down 8% year over year. And this is as of May 2024. So something to pay attention there too, as EBITDA per available room, obviously what you take it to the bank at the end of the day. So what does that mean? What can we do to help shift strategy, right? To start looking at profit over revenue and making some of our daily decisions on profit management over revenue management. One of the things we can do is obviously shift our focus to reducing costs and maximizing profitability. And really the idea there is to retain, if not grow, profit margins. One of the things that we like to talk about is a cultural shift within your company where you can implement a change management process, really empowering each department to make profit-driven decisions over revenue decisions. And then last but not least, we talk about total profit optimization, which is the idea of looking outside of just rooms, bringing some of those revenue management strategies and profit management strategies that we've used in rooms to some of the ancillary departments, whether that be F&B, parking, spa, and golf, and really trying to understand the profit margin of each of those departments to help you make stronger decisions. So with that said, we'd like to go around the hotel, and our esteemed panelists are going to join me and talk about profitability strategies in each of the departments. Let's start in operations. Ed, I'd really like to start with you as the experienced operator in the group. And I'd like to talk about managing labor costs. What are you guys doing at Pinehurst Resort to manage labor costs, and what are some of the strategies you've seen to optimize labor costs at your property?
Since COVID, the biggest thing has been reducing turnover. With the hospitality industry seeing such high turnover since the pandemic, really having labor with context, labor who are experienced is tougher to come by. So it takes more people to do the same job. And then the other things are cross-training strategy. You know, if you can cross-train your staff, you can cover more bases with the same people. You can be more successful.
Ravi, are you seeing hotels with Agilysys putting some operational strategies into place based on the labor data that they're calculating?
Yeah, so I mean, the first and foremost is to capture the data, right? To make sure you have data about your laborers, whether it's training data, how skilled they are, and how they're performing. But yeah, I mean, I was looking at the American Hotels and Lodging Association report, and it said 80% of hotels are reporting staffing shortages, and housekeeping is the toughest, right? 50% cite housekeeping as their greatest hiring need. So this, I think. Uh, Agilysys provides tools, and that's what probably all properties may want to look at. As Ed mentioned, tools is part of the solution, but using leaderboards and looking at how servers have performed or how housekeeping staff has performed against each other, benchmarking values and saying what in the case of a server, what's the opportunity cost, how much tips are they getting, what's the total value that they're generating, looking at housekeeping metrics like what are the room turnover times, what are the issue resolution times, and keeping track of these, making sure that your labor is trained. I guess these are some strategies to make sure that you keep up with the lack of labor actually available in the market. And then there are abilities to use technology like kiosks for check-in, or kiosks at the food and beverage places to buy stuff. So that kind of can be a backup solution if the servers or the manual human labor does not turn out. But hospitality is a high touch model where you need personal interaction. So it's just a mix of all of the above to kind of face these challenges.
Yeah, Niki, I think a big part of understanding or putting strategies into place is accurate forecasting, right? And understanding demand for the upcoming days so then you can schedule appropriately. How are we helping hoteliers, put accurate demand forecasts together to help them make operating decisions?
We're attacking that problem in, I think, two primary ways. So it would be just with traditional budgeting and forecasting. So our systems allow for hoteliers to really kind of bring in real data from their accounting systems and or their PMS systems and look at what they're actually seeing and really kind of try to figure out what's driving that performance and how they can use those drivers to really predict what those costs and what those revenues might end up being in either a 1, 3, 2-week time frame. So that's one way that we're attacking it. The other way that we're attacking it is really around kind of the business insights. So when we think about both what Ed and both what Ravi have touched on, there is a lot of data out there and there is a lot of technology out there. But all of that data kind of needs to be blended together for it to make sense. And so how can we actually provide a meaningful insight to the people who are making decisions around housekeeping schedules, right? Around maintenance schedules. We talk about tickets, right? So there's definitely systems out there that are giving us further insight into maintenance schedules and ticket resolution. Is there a way to use that information so that we can help the staff out a little bit more, because we know that they're overtaxed on property? And if we can use those insights to not only schedule and get ahead of those schedules a little bit more so, can we also give that information to the people in the field and in the hotel in a way that they aren't constantly searching for information or unable to really service the guest?
Yeah, that all makes sense. Anything to add to that, Ed?
So I think that's terrific. I heard Ravi talk about housekeeping. I think about speed and cleanliness, and it really goes back to your schedule, and it goes back to the retention. Retention is so difficult in a post-COVID world, especially for hospitality.
Yeah. All right, guys.
I think that's a great point.
Go ahead, Niki.
I was just going to say, touching on something that you just said, and then also Ravi that you brought up, technology is being introduced in the hospitality world in a faster pace than it was pre-pandemic. And I think a lot of times in hospitality, we like to think that it's such a high touch business because we are hospitable folks in hospitality, that technology sometimes can be a contradiction to that. But when we look at the introduction of these technologies, you're really actually helping the staff on site And if they can be more productive, they're not going to be as stressed. And that should have some beneficial impact to the turnover and the retention rates.
Yeah, very helpful. So I think when we talk about using data to make decisions and business intelligence, often those strategies start in the commercial department. So let's shift and talk a little bit about the commercial department. I wonder, Ed, if that's how you guys have it set up at Pinehurst. Are a lot of those data-driven decisions sort of being led from the revenue team and then pushed out to the other departments? Or is everybody sort of using business intelligence and insights equally across the property?
Definitely not equal for us. I wish it was more so. Uh, for us, you have the data analyzers and you have managers who really dig into the information. I think the tools are readily available for everyone, but for us, I think the bigger challenge has been adoption across the different groups. You have a lot of different places that you can draw revenue from in a full service resort. You have a lot of different people making decisions, but not a lot of consistency in how those tools are used.
But I know you guys have made some advancements towards looking at data outside of just rooms, right? Yeah, you are looking at some of the golf and spa data. Tell me sort of how that process works for you guys.
So we roll it all up. It starts very granular. We collect all the data into the data warehouse. And then because we capture it at the micro level, we can look at it at the macro level rolled up easily. Everything from individual therapists and individual treatment rooms and how they perform individual housekeepers and how they perform individual servers, and even detailed guest information is captured, and then at every step along the way can be looked at individually or incrementally.
Niki, I'll go to you next on that one. What have you seen our customers doing to sort of diversify their revenue streams outside of just rooms?
Well, we're seeing a lot of activity is really kind of in the food and beverage space, and also as it relates to group contracts, and not the smaller group contracts, like really these larger group contracts. That dynamic has very much changed in the last few years. And so a couple things that we're seeing is definitely a deeper dive into food and beverage. So when you look at your revenue streams across most hotels, food and beverage is going to be the second revenue driver when we think of revenue drivers outside of traditional room revenue. And with the POS systems providing the amount of data that they are and being able to tie those to PMS systems, you can really see number of covers, you can see by time of day, where the activity is, you can see server performance, menu performance, a lot of different data points to help optimize how you might actually manage those operations more efficiently. I think the next step there is, as that adoption curve increases with our clients, how do we get the folks who are on the commercial side talking to the folks who are actually working in the operations to really kind of make an impact on any decisions and insights that they're seeing across those metrics. And then the other place I would say is the group business has fundamentally changed in the past few years. And so one of the things that we're actually seeing customers do is really look at their sales contracts and have an understanding of, okay, how valuable are these sales contracts? Are we actually displacing higher revenue because our transient demand is a little bit higher than what we had previously planned for, or how we previously thought about that approach? And so those are two areas that we're starting to see it, but we're definitely seeing a pickup in what I would say is other revenue sources outside of the traditional room revenue source.
Ravi, anything to add to that? How are you seeing Agilysys customers sort of use that data outside of rooms?
Yeah, so I mean, customer lifetime value is the key thing right now. And it's not only in hospitality, in every industry, like Uber, they were giving rides to people, but then they realized, you can only optimize it to a certain extent. What do you do next? How do you diversify? So they came up with Uber Eats, right? So there is more than one way to generate revenue. So the customer lifetime value, his spend across all amenities across the property, that's of key importance. I think what's the next step? The next step is to make sure that that data is consolidated, and as I had mentioned, it's in a warehouse, whether it's the property does it by themselves or they use third-party tools. It's key to have a unified central system with the data and also guest profiles, right? So You want the guest who's getting a spa treatment, you want him to be in the system so that even other products or other areas, revenue centers can access that guest information and know a little bit more about him, and offer coupons or offers based on his or her behavior. So I think just getting that information is key. And we've seen that the customer data is not always clean, right? So there are blank fields, there are null fields, and that's a problem across the industry. I used to work in an OT earlier. We saw the same issue there. So I think the recommendation to all properties is to try to get as much clean data as possible. Obviously, the guest has to be willing to provide that information. But if they do, then that's the base. So even if you get to it like 6 months from now or 1 year from now, you at least have the data to make those predictions and to look at the consolidated behavior and spend habits of a particular guest, and then offer the right offers as needed. So, we've seen examples where a guest spends a lot in restaurants but does not visit the property enough. So that's a great situation where, just give the person a few nights off on his anniversary or birthday, and, the F&B revenue will more than easily take care of that, plus a lot more. So that's what we're seeing, and we're hoping that this becomes even better as we go forward. The data mining and the appreciation of the guest. As I think Jeff Bezos said, that personalization is when a guest goes to a bar and the bartender puts a whiskey right in front of him without asking him what he needs. So that's the level we want to get to. And it starts with getting good data and collecting data across all revenue centers in a property.
Ed, did any of that spur anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I actually did. And really, Niki's point about the group business changing since 2019, or really starting in 2020, that segment has shifted so much. And I don't know that any of us were prepared for the surge in the transient social and the decline of group segment through COVID. Right. And that it was sustained the length of time that it was. And if you go back to your earlier slides and you're starting to see things pull back, for us, group was already low. I think for most of my peers, group was already low, but now transient's retracting a little bit. How do we prepare? How do we look at the data to prepare for that shift that's coming, or seems to be coming going forward, that none of us were quite prepared for in 2020?
Yeah, great point. Great question. Anybody have anything to add to that?
I think one of the things that we're better positioned today than we were 3-4 years ago is it's not the same story that we're going to see again, but we've now learned that we've got to look for these markers a little bit sooner, right? So the entire industry is talking about a softening demand, that the transient travel will likely not see some of the peaks that we've been seeing over the past couple of years. And the fact that we're talking about it so early, I think, is a good indication. The other progression that is going to position us a little bit better as an industry is the fact that data is more accessible. We still have our challenges, right? Getting data out of some of the older systems in our ecosystems, but the data is more available. And what that means is that we can slice and dice. So if we know that there's actually a different level of profitability across these segments, there's also different operational profiles of these different segments. And that's going to inform us, I think, as an industry to do things a little bit different. Campaigns are going to be different. Upsells are a tool that we have more ability to use today than we did 3 or 4 years ago. But the data is really going to be able to drive us into, I think, a more proactive stance versus a reactive stance than how we were a few years ago.
Yeah, I agree. I think the return of group business, I think it will come back strong, Ed. I think it's coming back slowly now. But all that is just extra emphasis to look outside of rooms, right? And look at F&B and look at other areas that you can capture more profitability from the guest. Let's switch directions a little bit and talk about the F&B department. So, Niki, you mentioned this earlier, a lot of opportunity in F&B, I think. Talk about some of the data that we are providing or that hoteliers should be looking at in the F&B department.
It's a great question. So I think one of the things that we see a ton of opportunity in is marrying up the commercial and the operational side of that business. When you think about something like menu optimization, It's actually linked to server performance to some extent, right? And so there's a story that we have with one of our former clients where the menu performance was basically suggesting that demand for certain items were lower than what was anticipated. And you start driving into it, and this was an independent hotel. When you really started looking at how the servers were selling those menu options was actually an impact. And you could dive in deeper on what was happening. And so you would have higher margin products, such as wine, that maybe the servers just weren't fully trained on. And they didn't have enough experience on how to sell a bottle of wine versus a glass of wine. Well, that has a different margin profile. But to get to the end of that story, you have to find the data. And then you've got to talk to the people who are literally on the ground and have the conversation. And it took an analysis of both your menu performance and your server performance. So that's where we see it. Like, it is boundless, the opportunities, because I don't think we've been in a position where we've been able to see that many insights in this part of the world.
Ed, it looks like you're nodding your head here, and I know you mentioned earlier some of that detailed analysis that you folks are doing. What are some strategies that are working for you in the F&B department?
Well, I think Niki hit it dead on. I mean, the menu item popularity and the profitability of the item. The second part of that goes directly to cost of goods. So if your most popular dish on the menu is a lobster dish and you have a volatile product that can spike, having the data to react and then switch that menu mix quickly to maintain the profitability of the menu and still put products on the menu, maybe a scallop dish that the service staff can be excited about and talk about and perform better because of, brings it all together, right? So data helps you make quick decisions. You make the decisions and you can still bring everybody full circle with it.
Ravi, anything to add about analysis in the F&B department?
Yeah, so I think Niki and Ed touched upon menu engineering, which is definitely the big thing. So in our solutions, we do a few things like we run these frequent item set algorithms, which is also called neighbor algorithms. So it would go through all transactions and see what two items sell the most together. So it's now big data, giving voice to big data, right? So let the data speak. So even the humans may not know what to. So we've seen in some cases, the medium fries and a Diet Coke sells in most transactions, right? So we have counts of those. So that's a key input in defining or putting together a menu or putting like specials of the day, or it's called sets in APAC region, or package deals, or what's your whole value set, bundles rather. So the daily specials. So it can contribute towards that. Then we also have these ability to do analysis on different prices for the same item. So we're able to that is also a trick, right? To increase the margins, you have to try out what is the sweet spot price for a certain item. So if you try it at different times, so there is the ability to look at what was the Goldilocks sweet spot where most items sold and the total revenue was also higher. So that's also a contributing factor. Other than that, we do a lot in guest marketing as well. So just understanding the guest, which is really hard to do in many point of sale systems because there is no guest data which is stored. But there are ways of going around that, like looking at credit card tokens and coming up with profiles to understand what a certain guest does. You may not know the name, but you may know that this profile guest, this is his behavior. And ultimately, as they call it, we're in the era of hyper segmentation. It's the segment of one, right? We don't have groups and batches of people. It's like, how do you cater to that individual guest, the individual unique guest who has his or her own? And these are some methods that we can do. Other metrics are typical, like staffing and loss prevention and cost management, which are pretty much, I think we know how to deal with many of those problems. They're hard problems, but we have the tools, and the new ones are just just understanding the guest and menu engineering, and just having the insights to know what things are working, or which server needs more training, by looking at, let's say there are too many voids processed by one server. Is it there's something missing? Should we look into that? So these are just all the above are the metrics that key to running an F&B operation, because the margins are low in F&B and it's a hard business to run. So data can play an important role in these activities.
Yeah, Ed, I'm wondering, I'm curious at Pinehurst, do you have a lot of people that come in just to use the dining outlets and not to stay? overnight, and are you able to sort of look at the profitability of each of those guests and compare?
So it's funny you bring that question up because that's a place where Ravi and I have had communications over time about exactly that. And the credit card tokens and that whole discussion arises from those conversations. At least I think so, right, Ravi? At least to some degree.
Yes.
Absolutely. Deciding what your outside spend is key. How do you attract those outside guests to come in and utilize your restaurants? How do you develop an upsell strategy that gets them to buy the high margin bottle of wine or the desserts off the dessert menu? Absolutely are key parts of our business and things we track and chase.
Yeah. And we have been doing some work on that. It's again a hard problem to solve where getting 100% results is probably never going to happen, but you can get close to that. So we'd look at many factors. Did this specific guest, is he utilizing the golf services or the spa services? Is he staying at the property? If it's none of the above and there's no credit card transaction, we'd probably mark that as a transient guest, right? We use these hints and we think we're getting closer to that solution.
Cool. So let's talk about just that. Let's talk about golf. Taking some of those similar strategies that we talked about in F&B and transferring them over to golf. I think F&B we're probably a little bit further ahead, and you would have the best insight here. Are you using analytics in the clubhouse, and what kind of data can you use in the clubhouse to make better decisions?
So I think the opportunities are great. I don't think the industry as a whole does a lot of it today. Golf demand is driven off of basically two factors. If everything else is equal, it's going to be the season, depending on where you're at geographically, and the time of day. People want generally morning tee times and they want nice weather. And if they have those two things, those are the highest demand rounds. I think my friends at Agilysys are doing some pretty cool things to look at that. The TPC as an organization is yielding tee times now.
Wow.
Generally, it's not been a segment that's been looked at deeply, and hopefully that will continue to evolve.
Niki, what about Otelier? What insight does Otelier provide for these resorts that have golf courses attached?
So we're typically looking at kind of those same variables that Ed brought up, and that's what we're delivering to the customers is kind of where do you see the demand? How's that demand coming in? Can we bring in weather data to help be predictive about that demand and how a storm coming in might affect those, and that might trigger additional offers like spa offers. If it's going to be a rain out, then do something on property that isn't on the golf course. And so I think it's really tethering together those data points. I do agree with Ed, where I think the industry as a whole and kind of extracting data from those systems is probably not nearly as mature as what we see in food and beverage. It is a huge area of opportunity. And probably when we start thinking about these types of revenue models, area of innovation that our industry and our teams can actually start to drive.
Yeah, I would agree. Even things like measuring retail sales in the clubhouse. You guys may be doing that, Ed, but maybe, I've heard the example on Tuesdays, gentlemen come into golf and they prefer polo shirts in the clubhouse versus on Sundays the ladies come and they prefer hats or something different. We could get to that point of measuring.
We certainly track revenue per round and revenue per night stay and associate all those things the best we can. But some of it falls back to the same sort of things with the transient and the food and beverage and tying them together. I can tell you that during the U.S. Kids World Championship, retail empties the golf shop because there's 130 countries of kids here,
There you go.
And it's an amazing thing, but tying the ones that stayed on property versus the ones that even may not have played here just because there's 45 golf courses in our county.
Wow.
And with so many, it's ideal for an event like that, but they come to Pinehurst and buy retail, and that might be the only thing they do here. So how to tie that out to figure out what the wallet share is for our individual guests or players versus just pure transient outside is pretty difficult.
All right, we've got about 5, maybe 8 minutes left. Let's hit quickly on spa, folks. My guess is that we're probably around the same area of innovation in spa as we are as golf. Maybe a lot of opportunity there, right? A lot of opportunity to measure things like therapist performance that Ed mentioned earlier, or retail in the spa, right? How can we dynamically price stuff like that? Ed, how are you guys approaching spa?
So I think spa is actually more mature than golf, even though it's generally probably unless you're a pure spa property, it's a smaller segment of the business, almost for everyone that has both. Um, but spa has the yielding technologies, the price strategy stuff has matured faster with spa, even though it's a much more complicated product to book. So you have to have the right credentials for the right therapist to do the right things. You have to have not just the room space, but the right person all at the right time to book a spa appointment. It is a very complex mix to bring together. But we have for quite some time now dynamically adjusted Friday and Saturday mornings simply because they're the highest demand times in the spa. There's quite a bit just within the Agilysys base product to yield the spa, and there's becoming a lot of different products out there that can do those things where it was less so with golf. I think spa is actually more mature.
Niki, anything to add to what Ed said on spa?
No, I agree. The interesting thing about spa is compared to golf is it's almost very similar to food and beverage. You got the extra operational and staffing considerations that you need to take into account that create those complexities, but you just got more levers to pull from a pricing standpoint, from a package standpoint, from just an overall offering. And I think that has really kind of driven the technologies to meet kind of what the customers need as it relates to spa services. So that's an area where I do think that it's been innovating quite a bit lately. And we've seen that. And so with a lot of our customers, we'll bring in similar types of information as we would food and beverage, right? So duration, what type of service, profitability of that service, so on and so forth. And so we see a lot of adoption on that. It's not the highest revenue component of most of our customers, but it is one of those areas where I think you can make a quick transition on how conceptually food and beverage is thought of with spa.
Yep. All right, we're going to throw in one more department in there. We can't forget about the accounting department. I think, guys, a lot of times when we're talking about these metrics, and especially profitability metrics and measuring flow through of revenue by department, the key there is having that P&L data, right? Having some of that expense and cost data, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of comes from the accounting system and the integration that's required there. Talk a little bit, Niki, about the importance of bringing that cost and profitability data in when you're making some of these decisions.
I mean, I think a key component is getting both sides of the P&L available to you as soon as possible. So when we start thinking about profitability, large pieces of profitability are driven by the revenue, but it really is that cost profile of the revenue, and those two factors drive your profitability. And so you're only really kind of seeing a myopic picture if you're only looking at top line metrics and information coming in. And so, especially when we start thinking about labor source systems coming through either an accounting system or coming directly into business intelligence tools like Otelier's, getting labor data in, getting some other level of cost information, whether it's from your procurement system, really gives a ton of insight onto that profitability. Then the other thing that I think we kind of lose sight on is that when we talk about accounting on property, we're actually talking about kind of two things that we've already talked about in this webinar. One is around keeping the staff happy and retention rates, and the accounting processes. I mean, I don't want to speak out of turn to anybody who loves accounting, but they're not the funnest, right? Especially the mundane ones where you have to do them every day. So when you're having to enter in invoices into the system every day and then get approval of that and cut checks, if you're having to do an income journaling transaction where your transaction codes don't necessarily match up to your GL codes, but you need to have that right split to really kind of understand the performance of the company before your books are closed, those processes are mundane. And so if we can give time back to the staff by automating those processes, then we're helping with that retention curve. We're actually giving time back to employees where it's not going to be as taxing for them. So that's one component. And I think when we talk about accounting processes, it's not just about accurate information. Accurate information and with less latency is always going to be more insightful, but also the automation component, I think, is something that we can really focus on as an industry here in the next year.
Ed, this shift from sort of top line measurements to bottom line measurements, is that something that you've sort of evolved over time, or is that something that you've always looked at Pinehurst?
I think we always looked at it, but I think for certain, and I hate to bring COVID back up, but that's certainly was a time where there was maybe a realization that we should be looking at the bottom line, because the wallet share was increasing so much from individual guests. So we were seeing missing room night budgets pretty significantly, but breaking revenue records, which meant those individuals were more profitable. We were servicing less people at a higher dollar amount. It just inherently was more profitable. So that changed the focus a lot. I think too that Niki made a whole lot of great points there. I mean, making people happier, making their jobs less mundane, kind of helps the back end to create better service standards. I think that the whole thing is coming together to go a long way. And then reaction time. Everything is, do we react fast enough? Back to COVID, we didn't probably react fast enough as the segment shifted from group to social. Providing that data so that leaders can react on the floor and in time to make staffing and other changes to reduce those costs and improve the overall bottom line performance.
Ravi, any parting thoughts as we close up here on the importance of the accounting system and measuring that profitability data?
Yes. So, I mean, in our conversations with our customers, we've seen, to Niki's point, that a lot of unnecessary hours are put into just gathering the data from multiple systems and putting it together, right? And there are solutions in place which can be used, piping it to one central system and then pulling the data from there. A known interface that, you just have to use one interface. Why do you want to interact with multiple systems? So I think that is key. And a lot of customers have seen benefits right away, just saving on time and convenience. And to Ed's point, data should be democratized and information should be available to whoever needs it at the right time. So and if these processes are automated and you can get close to real-time information, decisions can be made off the fly, and the operations can improve, and top line and bottom line both can improve.
Awesome. Well, Ravi, Ed, Niki, it's been an awesome conversation. Really, really, really appreciate your time and insights. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. We appreciate you tuning in. As a reminder, the slides will be sent and recording will be sent within 24 hours of today. And if you have additional questions for Ravi and Niki, here is their contact information. You can see it on the screen, and they have each graciously approved reaching out to them for additional questions. Guys, thanks so much for being with us today. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.